What you are about to hear is not a podcast. This is a global conversation recorded live in real time with real people.
Journalists,
business leaders,
academics, politicians. I think the term's a deep state. Oh dear.
investors,
Experts, diplomats.
citizens.
Coming together from around the world to share their views and ask our guests the questions. If you would like to join this conversation or hear our incredible library of past conversations, please visit our website, pm101.club, and join the fastest growing conscious community on the free internet. Thanks for being here.
Enjoy the
Enjoy the show. Welcome back to Politics and Media 101, the place where we all hear live and direct from people in the news in their own voices, in their own words, in long form, and where anyone who wants to can join to ask them a question, share their thoughts, or just listen. I'm Jeff Browning, and I'm grateful to you for being here. Today, we're excited to release part of an interview, conversation, and audience Q&A we had right at the intersection of sports and politics with Congresswoman Lori Trahan of Massachusetts. College athletic programs generate a lot of money for schools, and college athletes do often receive scholarships or other benefits. But unlike pro sports athletes, college athletes don't earn a salary. In recent years, this issue has bubbled up in the public sphere, with state legislatures, the NCAA, Congress, and even the Supreme Court all weighing in on how they think college athletes should be treated or allowed to earn money or not. Of all members of Congress, Representative Trahan is one of the most passionate about this issue. She herself was a volleyball player in college. She played for 4 years and received a scholarship. Without this scholarship, she might not have been able to follow the educational or professional path she took. So needless to say, this is an issue that's near and dear to her heart, central to her story, and since she's also a leading member of Congress working to do something about it and change laws in this area, she was a perfect person to talk to. It was a great discussion with awesome audience questions, and we hope you enjoy it as much as we did. As always, if you like or dislike what you hear, if you want to find out how to join us live almost every day of the week, maybe ask one of our upcoming guests a question, or hear past episodes, please visit our website, pm101.club or pm101.live. They both work and will get you to the same place where you can find all that and more. Without any further ado, let's roll the tape.
I don't think there's a better person to be discussing athletes' rights, paying them, what this means for labor issues, especially considering you're a leader on this issue. So I just wanted to thank you very much for coming.
Oh, well, it's great. It's great to be here, and it's great to talk with folks who are sort of elevating this conversation. It's an important one. What did you play in school?
So I was a baseball player, originally committed to Boston College, and then ultimately played at Tufts. So like you, I wasn't a volleyball player. I was too short, actually. But I went to a good college and played college athletics. And did you play 4 years at Georgetown?
I did, which we were in the same conference. You know, Georgetown is in the Big East Conference. So what a ride. It's such an honor to play for your school.
It really is. And for me, it helped me get in academically. And that's a big draw for a lot of college athletes. But I was wondering, kind of just to kick this off, what was the best aspect of being a student athlete at a school like Georgetown?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I was so humbled by the opportunity to play or to continue playing. You know, I actually found volleyball late in life. I was a basketball player my whole life, and you know, kind of tried out for the freshman volleyball team in high school, and fell in love with it. You know, played club ball, which in those days, you know, club wasn't what it is today. So there weren't many. So, you know, like you know, volleyball paved the way for me to go to the school that I dreamed of going to. I mean, academically, I knew I wanted to go to Georgetown at an early age. I knew I wanted to go to the School of Foreign Service. Like in the 8th grade, I knew that. So,
oh, my goodness.
Yeah, no, I know. I was so far ahead sort of, you know, in terms of what my goals were academically than I ever was athletically. That I was a late bloomer. I grew late. So never really thought I would ever get to play beyond high school. And then there I was, getting recruited by my dream school. And so that for me was, that was the ultimate, right? Getting to go to Georgetown, my first choice, getting to suit up with a bunch of women who, some of them I played with during my club years, and they were awesome, right? They were from California and Colorado and all over the country. But, it really does, going to campus early, volleyball is a fall sport. So I got to go down in the summertime, instantly have camaraderie and friends and sort of a support group in those student athletes that go down early before everybody else comes to campus. It was all it added so much to the experience. And I don't know if you know, but I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college. So, I was homesick. My parents were nervous, dropping me off, and all of that. Being on a team really helps you kind of get through those transitions.
Yes, no, and so we had a different approach. I was way far ahead athletically, and then eventually, because of getting into the school on scholarship, or not on scholarship because it was Division III, but getting into the school through athletics, I found a passion for academia as well. So it's kind of cool that we're coming from this from different perspectives. So I was wondering, we talked about all the good of being a student athlete, and you went to school, I went to school before the NIL laws, which we will get into. But I was wondering, what are some of the challenges you faced in being a student athlete that maybe people who look at the college athletes of today, they view them as celebrities, they view them as athletes, they don't understand that it's not all roses and there are some challenges. What were some challenges you faced?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because sometimes it gets lost in the conversation, especially when we're talking about NIL. Is that, of course, going to play for your college is an honor, right? It comes with an enormous amount of pride. It also comes with an enormous amount of sacrifice. And I don't think that's what is discussed nearly enough. I mean, so many of the players that play in school are, they're first generation college students. They're just scraping by, right? And for me, I mean, I never would have been able to go to a college like Georgetown if not for the scholarship that I got. And so I think it really is important to paint the real life context that athletes go through because they don't have spending money. They don't, like, outside of the meal plan, there's no food. I mean, there's no money to go and buy a meal that you may have missed, or snacks, or all that stuff for late night, like all nighters for you don't have any spending cash. And frankly, you don't have those opportunities to even make money, right? I mean, I couldn't work while I was playing at Georgetown. I couldn't participate in internships. I couldn't study abroad. And I was in the School of Foreign Service. So that's an enormous kind of setback when you think of the competitive advantage of your peers in going through school. And then, look, I tell the story all the time. I mean, when I played volleyball at Georgetown, I couldn't coach a summer camp for high school girls back home because according to the NCAA, it jeopardized my amateur status. Now, we all know that's ridiculous. It's why I'm so passionate about college athletes' rights, whether that's to be compensated for the use of their name, image, and likeness, and their right to stand up for themselves by organizing and negotiating the comp, safety, and playing conditions they deserve, because that's always gotten in the way. To think that I couldn't coach the next generation of volleyball players because of some, relic of this system of protecting amateurization, which basically protects the status quo for the NCAA, is ludicrous. So I think that's it's really important that people kind of understand who student athletes are, who college athletes are, and why paving the way to give them more say and more rights is really important and frankly long overdue.
Okay, so this is awesome. One of the things that I struggled with as a college athlete was that and I come from a lower middle class family, was that the dining hall used to close at 9. But as you know, Congresswoman Trahan, we are on these workout regimens. We're supposed to eat at certain times, and you're just you're a young adult, basically a teenager, who's always hungry. So you're supposed to work out, but then you can't eat unless you basically come from a more well-off family and have that extra spending money, not to mention, going out with friends and all of that stuff. And you're working 60, 70 hours a week with school and athletics. So I assume that you see this as a labor issue. And I'm wondering if you could help me understand why, as some people argue, being a college athlete is already a privilege. These student athletes are getting admitted to schools, and it's easier to get into the schools. They're getting free education, they're getting free books, and they are being given an opportunity that no one else, very few other people get at that level. So why isn't that enough? Why should they be paid for their work and their effort?
So it is a great question, and I'm glad you brought up, the sort of very real world challenges athletes have with dining hall hours, with studying, right, with office hours. I mean, there were so many things that were in conflict with our schedules, right? Whether it was going to get extra work or tutoring or even your classes. I mean, I can't believe how many classes I had to miss just because of travel days. And so, even though your parents are, I remember my parents were like, well, they have so much, we have peace of mind because at least we know you're fed and you're housed. And, like you, I missed many meals because, 5 hours a day is 5 hours a day. And sometimes you miss out on those dining hall hours. Look, no one's questioning the honor and the privilege it is to play for these schools. And if you ask any athlete, they'll be the first ones to say, "Oh my gosh, it's the honor of a lifetime to suit up and to represent my school on the court or the field." I think what we have to keep in mind is that who's creating all the value of what has become, in the case of the NCAA, more than a $16 billion industry. And that's the athletes, right? The athletes are creating that value. They're extracting none of it. And so I do think it's important when you look at, where the money is going, whether it's to coaches or executives. Of course you can see an NCAA that's interested in protecting the status quo. It's great for them, and it's not for the athletes. And so whether we're talking about the opportunity for students to benefit in an unrestricted way with minimal interference from the NCAA and codifying their right to monetize their NIL, or their ability to organize together so that they can be a voice at the table for safer conditions, more equity in tournaments, for example, better accommodations on campus. That, I think, is really important that, we just update our system because they're creating all the value. Other people are kind of, extracting all the value that they're creating. And that is a power imbalance that has been allowed to perpetuate in college sports that is going to change.
Yes, and it is changing, especially from the days when you and I were back in school playing, because recently, this June, actually, for everybody in the audience, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that opens the door for athletes to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Congresswoman, but basically make money off of their name and likeness. So for everybody in the audience, if you're a car dealer in Alabama and you want to have your cars advertised on TV represented by Bryce Young, the Alabama quarterback, now you can do that, and you can pay them 6 figures, 7 figures, however much money, and they can then still play college sports. That was not previously the case. So I'm wondering, how do you view the changing landscape regarding name and likeness, and what have you done specifically since this Supreme Court case? Because for the audience as well, it's not like every player in every state can get paid. The Supreme Court made it possible that players can get paid, but now state laws kind of determine that. So if you're in California, you can get paid, but if you're in Texas, maybe you can't, as an example. So I'm wondering, Congresswoman, what do you view of the NIL changes, and what are you doing to make it better?
Yeah, so great. And I'll just speak a little bit about the Supreme Court's decision in Alston, which affirmed what I think current and former college athletes like you and me have known for a long time, and that's amateurism as we know it is long gone. It doesn't exist anymore, and frankly, it hasn't for a long time. But that hasn't stopped the NCAA from building, like I said, a multi-billion-dollar industry based on the guise of amateurism that is tilted almost exclusively in favor of executives and coaches on the backs of hardworking, talented, and, as we've established, often poor college athletes. So athletes' ability to be compensated for the use of their name, image, and likeness is just a long overdue step. And the Supreme Court's unanimous decision over the summer got us closer to that reality. But we can't afford to celebrate the Alston decision as a solution to all the problems within the NCAA, because it isn't. It's imperative that Congress build on the progress made earlier this year by, like I said, codifying college athletes' rights to monetize their NIL with minimal interference from the NCAA. So, why do we need federal an NIL standard? Is because, as you mentioned, we've got dozens of states that have now passed NIL laws and university regulations in states that haven't. This isn't fair. To make athletes decipher between all this patchwork of regulations. And so they need uniformity just as much, if not more, than the universities themselves. So it's clear that we're eventually going to have to harmonize this patchwork of different rules, which is why you're seeing conference commissioners and university heads across the country calling on Congress to act, and we must. It's why the College Athlete Economic Freedom Act, which I introduced with Senator Chris Murphy, is so important, because we need to establish a federal right for college athletes to market the use of their name, image, and likeness or athletic reputation, and prohibit organizations like the NCAA from restricting that right.
No, thank you very, very much for that. And the Supreme Court case was very, very important. And I'm wondering, okay, so I heard you just say we need federal laws to iron out all the different patchwork of state laws. And I heard we want minimal interference by the NCAA. So I'm wondering, does the NCAA have any role in shaping policies around how much athletes can make and the sources of income they can receive? And if they do have a role in it, should we be trusting the NCAA? What should the general public who maybe isn't following NCAA sports that closely, how should they view the NCAA? Are they a good faith actor, bad faith actor? And what role do they play in the future?
Great question. It's I think they're going to establish sort of the trust that we can put in them to act. I mean, there's no question that they kicked this can down the road for many, many years because it behooved them, right, to keep the status quo in place. And the NCAA, unfortunately, they've got some baggage here. They consistently act in its own best interest. So I think that, we had hearings, the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. We had hearings in September with the NCAA president, Mark Emmert, to, get at, the delay, the lack of action in this regard. In fact, one of the things I asked him point blank is if the NCAA's prediction that NIL rights would lead to the extinction of college athletes as we know it, because that was their position not so long ago. He didn't have much of a choice but to acknowledge that's clearly not the case. And so I do think what I saw in that hearing with Mr. Emmert after his testimony is that lawmakers across the political spectrum, they understand that college athletics has been fundamentally unfair to athletes for a long time. Of course, diagnosing problems is the easy part and often where bipartisanship ends. What has to happen now is we have to find the common ground necessary to address the glaring problems in the NCAA, and that's where I think there's room for bipartisan consensus. I've got Congressman Gonzalez and Congressman Cleaver have a bipartisan bill. That sort of rides alongside of the bill that I mentioned, that I introduced. And their bill's promising. I'm working with them and my colleagues and studying the existing state laws to see if there's a compromise that we can reach. But I have much more faith right now that Congress will act to give players what they're long overdue than I do the NCAA, which has just been, their decision to change their NIL policy after the Alston decision, that wasn't a coincidence. And it showed, that they've been reluctant to deal with this issue head on, which I think gives Congress an opening to kind of take the reins and do it for them.
So I was wondering for the audience if you could go a little bit further into what your legislation does. I read the summary on congress.gov. I used to be in LA, so I'm very embarrassed to admit I have not read the full piece of legislation. But the summary looks like it's rather targeted, and maybe your bill ascribes a different level of power to the NCAA than, like you mentioned, some of the other bills out there. There's also very conservative bills out there from Senator Moran, Wicker, and a whole host of other characters. So what does your bill do, and what role do you specifically see the NCAA having in making policy regarding this moving?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that what I like about Senator Murphy's bill and Senator Murphy and my bill is the simplicity of it, right? I mean, you can really get wrapped around an axle trying to put in guardrails, which can easily just become obstructions to athletes monetizing their name, image, and likeness. We don't do that. We basically want to codify their unfettered right to monetize their name, image, and likeness. And we don't want interference from anyone, from any conference or university or NCAA, any organization. And I think the thing that's important is that we give athletes, the right of action, right? Private action, so that if that right is trampled on or restricted in any way, that they'll be able to exercise their rights through litigation. And I think that is that's really where you tip the scales toward a policy that works on behalf of players, works on behalf of student athletes. And so I think that there's lots of place where we can, find common ground. Like I said, I'm working with some of my colleagues to figure out where that could be. And there have been some great ideas in that regard. But it's really important to me that the legislation at the end of the day allows players the unfettered right for them to monetize their NIL, because frankly, all the folks who forecasted that college sports would be dead, or it's going to set up all sorts of inequity in the locker room. It's just that none of that is borne out, right? I mean, if we look at what's happened just in the month since we've had NIL, we're seeing women. In fact, there's the contracts are actually bigger across the board collectively for women's basketball players than they are for men's basketball. Who would have ever thought that would have been the outcome, right? And also giving them the private right of action is an important tool that players need if we're going to make sure that they're not put at a disadvantage, again, by a powerful conference or university.
We were talking with Congresswoman Lori Trahan. She represents Lowell and Concord and a very wide, sprawling district in Massachusetts. I believe it is the 3rd district. And I used to actually play summer college baseball out of Lowell way back when. But yes, for the it used to be the Lowell All-Americans, the NECBL team out there.
Yes. Oh, wow. Did you play at Lasher Park?
Yes, I did.
Oh, great.
I love law. So, Congresswoman, I heard that your bill would allow athletes to sue. Do you eventually want student athletes to have the right to unionize? And do you think that that would help not only with maybe salaries, but also other issues that we've kind of been discussing throughout?
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about the previous bill for the NIL, but the College Athlete Right to Organize Act, which is another bill that I have with Senator Murphy, asserts what has been clear for I think too long, that college athletes are employees. They're entitled to the most fundamental of labor rights, and that's the right to organize unions and collectively bargain for fair pay and equitable conditions. I mean, college athletes are already treated like employees. They provide a valuable service in exchange for compensation in the form of scholarships and grants and aid that they lose if they do not perform the job as specified by their colleges or athletic department. So last year made that distinction even clearer as, college athletes continued to work and perform while their peers often were not on campus. So through organizing unions, college athletes will no longer have to wait for the NCAA and its members to treat them fairly. Rather, the athletes can finally have their voices and their interests heard across the myriad of issues that affect their lives. So, look, unions will, in my belief, will finally secure college athletes' seat at the table, and it'll give them the power to negotiate for fair and equitable compensation, protections on their health and well-being, and better academic opportunities. And I'm sure among other things that I'm missing, but I do think that it's an important step to just recognizing the reality of the situation today.
No, thank you for that. Now, Congresswoman, I have one more question. Maybe there'll be a follow up out of this. But you mentioned that you're working 5 hours a day when you're a college athlete on your craft, whether it be in the gym, eating plans, on the field or court or wherever you are, studying film and working just to get better. Then you also have schoolwork. So it doesn't sound like there's much time for other jobs. But not only that, it doesn't sound like there's much time for these student athletes to learn how to navigate the sponsorship field, how to get that car dealership agreement that pays them $50,000 to market their cars. What role in this new framework that we have emerging, the name and licensing, should colleges play in helping athletes be paid for their work?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Look, there's been a lot of scare tactics in terms of just kind of forecasting this day and how it's all the different pitfalls that will be there for college athletes. And I think we've seen some schools take a very proactive approach, right, to teaching, student athletes about, sort of managing these conversations with boosters, or getting them on solid footing about finances even. And you're not going to hear anyone argue about that not being an important part of anybody's education, right? I mean, especially with athletes. So, look, I think we've seen a number of stories of schools taking this proactive action to keep athletes informed of their NIL options, and in the cases of some schools like UNC, helping athletes organizing group licensing deals. I think if they take that same proactive approach to helping athletes when it comes to tax filings, we're going to be able to mitigate most of the concerns that are being tossed around NIL monetization. And some of them, I've had a lot of conversations, with folks who, really just think that the sky's going to fall. And the tax one often comes up because it's a very real thing that athletes are going to deal with when it comes to monetizing their name. image and likeness, but acting like it's a bad thing and a reason to rein in their right to be compensated for the use of their NIL is ridiculous. In fact, I brought up the story earlier about how I couldn't coach a volleyball camp because my amateur status would have been in jeopardy. And so what do you think I did during those summers? I worked. I worked as a waitress at TGI Fridays, and I filed taxes. And I think a lot of student athletes are in that same position. So this notion of not treating student athletes like adults, not treating college athletes after they've probably negotiated like the biggest deal of their lifetime in terms of signing their letter of intent to go to a school, that's just laughable. And it's one that can be mitigated with the university's help.
No, paying taxes does suck unequivocally, but the money that's coming in because you have to pay those taxes is also unequivocally a good thing. So that's kind of a fraudulent argument in my perspective. But I did want to just dig in a little bit deeper. So let's say you have a school like Alabama, and I don't mean to pick them out. Let's say you have school A who is very big into football. They draw 100,000 people a weekend. They have these lucrative SEC TV deals. And then they start hiring outside consultants just to get their football players the NIL deals so that their football players can make 6 or 7 figures. As everybody knows, football is a male's sport. Is there concern that schools will start to treat female athletes unequally in the way that they hire these consultants to promote these athletes to ultimately land this compensation that we've been discussing?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I'm involved in this legislation is because I think one of the criticisms toward NIL, especially in the beginning, was that women were going to get hurt. Right, women were not going to see any of the benefits of NIL. And I think for those of us paying close attention to this issue, I mean, the number of deals women college athletes have announced in recent months has been remarkable. Even for those of us who were confident that women would thrive in an NIL market. So we've been saying all along that the value college athletes bring to their schools and their sports, it goes far beyond the cost of a scholarship. And the booming number of NIL deals, large and small, across all sports continues proving that to be true. So I think we've seen the critics' argument that women would not fare as well as men in the NIL market. I think we've seen that thrown out the window. In fact, I mentioned earlier, recent data from Open Doors, total NIL compensation for women's basketball are higher than their male counterparts. And that's just one example. So I think that even beyond that, look, we know that universities and conferences don't place as much effort on advertising and promoting women's sports. I mean, look, anyone who attended a school with a D1 basketball or football program would tell you that much. The tremendous success women athletes are having in the NIL market is proof that that model is fundamentally flawed. And the fact of the matter is, NIL has incredible benefits for women athletes themselves and the sport that they play, but it's also invaluable to the next generation of athletes, young girls like my 2 daughters who are seeing women athletes as leaders in their sport and who they can look up to. So my hope is that we see even more engagement and promotion of the women's basketball tournament or softball tournament than we did this record-breaking year. And look, that's one of the things that's in the bill that we account for. We want to make sure that we have reporting so that if there are things that we didn't take into account, if there is a trend that, maybe has happened that, it increases a divide or inequity between men and women, we want that to be transparent, and we want to be able to, fix it. So I think that's one of the things that, we'll be looking at through the reporting requirement in the bill is making sure that, those disparities don't exist.
Okay, folks, let's go into the meat and potatoes of our discussion. It's you, the audience members, get to ask our great Congresswoman Lori Trahan, your questions. We've been talking about paying student athletes, student athlete rights, and the changing NCAA landscape. Feel free to keep it to that. Feel free to ask about other issues that are impacting your life. But we do have some rules here. Number one, wait for your name to be called on. Number two, be as concise as possible. The Congresswoman's time is valuable, and we want to get to as many people as possible. And number three, obviously, be respectful. So on that note, let's go to Steve Crone first, and then we'll go to Nina Gregory next. Steve.
Thanks. I have one question, but first I want to give one very quick piece of background, if it's okay.
Yes, of course.
Often people talk about the value of scholarships when we're talking about institutions that give scholarships as opposed to D3 schools. And I just want to point out that schools are required to count all financial aid as if it were athletic scholarship. And it's very misleading because many athletes would qualify and do qualify for need-based aid. And so even though the school may be saying, oh, it's a scholarship worth $60,000 a year, it could be that they would have qualified for $45,000 in need-based aid even if they weren't an athlete. And so it's very misleading when schools talk about the level of scholarship money that they're providing because they count everything as athletic scholarship, even if it's need-based. My question is a more fundamental one about the NCAA, Congresswoman, and that is, right now, everything you're talking about, which I wholly support. I'm on the board of an organization that is pushing in the same directions called Empower Fives. But I think more fundamentally, the NCAA is essentially the problem. And, we're obviously allowing athletes to organize, allowing them to be paid, allowing them to exploit their NIL rights are all steps in the right direction. But what do you see as sort of the long-term future of either eliminating or neutering the NCAA so they can't continue to, I can't think of another word, oppress athletes on college campus?
So thank you, Steve. And on your first point, you're absolutely right about financial-based aid and how that is factored in to the calculation of these scholarships. Look, some of my package was based on need, right? I mean, I just qualified right out of the gate, as I think a lot of athletes do, for these athletic for these scholarship packages. So I think it's a great point to make, and it also reinforces the profile of a typical college athlete, which I think has kind of gotten away from most folks when they're talking about why it's so important to give players the ability to their NIL. There's just not a lot of pocket cash, like at play here for these players. Look, I think that the NCAA is going to be it's an institution that is going to be forced to adjust, right? I mean, the ground is literally, kind of shaking underneath them in terms of who they're working for, right? I mean, I think the current model, the current business model, it rewards, executives, it rewards coaches, and players are now like that is discussable. I think a couple things that kind of came out of the hearing that we had with Mark Emmert. I mean, he acknowledged that he believes federal legislation should be as pro-athlete as possible. Now, we likely have different viewpoints of what that means, but the important thing is that the final product restores power to where it belongs, and that's with athletes. That's why we're working toward, and it's my hope that the NCAA joins us in that effort. But I think that will be the indication of the NCAA's viability moving forward, because there's no question that they're suffering from a lack of public support in this moment.
Thank you very much, Steve. We will go to Nina Gregory next, and then we will go to Kevin. Nina, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Congresswoman Trahan, for coming. This is one of my favorite subjects. I'm here representing UCLA. When I was an undergraduate there, I was a recruit a dance recruit, but I worked for the school paper, the Daily Bruin, and I covered sports, including our NCAA championship basketball team in the 90s. And I hung out with a lot of the athletes, and we would compare like being a dance recruit versus being a basketball recruit and the perks that we as individuals did or didn't get. Shocker, arts recruits didn't get anything. But this, from an individual basis, it felt like the student athletes, especially in basketball at UCLA, got a lot of perks as individuals. Later in my career, I went on to work at Fox Sports, where I saw the terms of the deals for some of these television rights. And if you look at News Corp's annual report, you can see in those years especially how much sports rights, specifically college sports rights, drove their bottom line. And I want to know, looking at, as an individual, it felt like, oh, these perks, blah, blah, blah. But in the larger scheme of things, the real money is in television rights. And I wonder if revenue sharing is anything that you're thinking about, if that's something can be legislated, and what your position is on that.
Yeah, you are. As you bring up a bunch of great points. In fact, we during the hearing that we had back in September, we had witnesses who talked about the fact that they couldn't start. There we had a woman athlete, and I'm forgetting her name right now, but she also had a tech business, right? And she couldn't actually be a tech entrepreneur because of this antiquated amateur status. And people who are there for, attending college on a music or an art scholarship, dancers.
We could work. We could be, yep.
It's exactly right. So showing that is, showing that we already have this sort of with other students and other groups on campus, I think is really important. I think that it's important to think about when we're talking about the folks who have opposed name, image, and likeness for college athletes. The concern is always sports is going to become professionalized. I think college athletics continue to increase in popularity year over year. The commercialization of college sports has followed suit, right? I mean, we see sponsorships at schools, at conferences, at the NCAA. They're auctioned off to the highest bidders. Company logos like Coca-Cola, they're plastered across playing surfaces at the highest levels of competition. And, partnerships like Michigan State's recent announcement with Rocket Mortgage have become the norm and are regularly worked into commercials and airtime. So I say all that because college athletics have been sold to the public the same way that professional sports have. And it's been happening that way for a long time. So the argument that people would either tune out if college athletes could monetize their NIL, I think has been, it's been thrown out the window. And, we have to catch up here in terms of making sure that we're allowing the athletes themselves to look as the folks who are literally creating the value, as I say over and over. You don't have this anywhere else in any other industry, where you create the value. The folks who are responsible with that typically get to extract the value, and that's not happening. So whether we're talking about, the commercialization of college sports, which is it's already, that's what we're living right now. All we're talking about is giving the athletes the right to be able to, be compensated for their role in that value creation.
Thank you for that question, Nina. We're going to go Kevin and then Sean and then Eugene. Kevin, over.
Thanks, Justin, and thanks, Congresswoman, for your time. My question is this. So I think the term college athletes will become a misnomer, considering the athletes are going to be treated as quote-unquote paid professionals. And no two schools are the same, right? So, and no two let's say, athletic programs are the same. So if you take, let's say, football and maybe soccer, the revenue generation probably will be different. If a school that is not, let's say, a high program school, right? So somewhere in the maybe unknown school in the suburbs, and for any reason, the athletes are getting paid, right? and let's say the program is probably expensive to be in that particular school, right? Now, will the school then say, well, since you are being paid as a professional and therefore you're getting a certain amount of money, now you have to pay the difference for your tuition because at this point you are actually almost a paid professional. So have this been thought through? Because no two schools are the same and no two programs are the same. Has this been thought through?
So thank you for the question. I mean, look, there's a couple things I think packed into your question, and that is, right now what we have is a patchwork of laws because some laws have passed. Legislation to let players monetize off their NIL. That has set up an unequal playing field, and it's also set up, a really hard environment for students to decipher. Right? It's hard enough to choose between a couple of offers. Perhaps if you're, great, you've hit that peak in your sport, and you're able to sort of assess one offer from another, that's already hard enough. And it comes with, enormous, anxiety about making the right decision. Never mind if then you have to look at, okay, does this state allow me to do X? Is this state play in this conference? I mean, that is the argument for making sure that we have a federal standard so that we can just take that complexity out of the equation for athletes. I think the current market that we've seen emerge from NIL is proof that college athletes making money does not pull from revenue of the sport that they actually play. That's as true of football as it is for women's basketball. And the benefit of NIL goes, way further, benefiting volleyball players or gymnasts. So I do think one of the reasons why we introduced shortly after the NIL bill was the college athlete right to organize is because it gives athletes the full freedom to organize and collectively bargain as they see fit. And so that is I think what you're probably just observing here is everything that we're trying to do is put the power back with the athletes because they're adults and they have not been treated as such for a long time. And they should have the ability to collectively bring their voice to the table. And so many of the things that we're trying to forecast of what will happen, one, a lot of those things have not happened. Two, there's going to be things that we don't think of that will happen, but giving players the power to stand up for themselves when those things do come to fruition, I think is the most important sort of principle that we can put into place rather than having the NCAA do that for them.
That was a really good question, Kevin. We were discussing it in our prep for this. We had a 2-hour debate on basically that. But I do want to also highlight what something the Congresswoman brought up. Congresswoman and I probably were not high profile enough to get offered cash under the table, but a lot of these people that are getting these NIL deals for 6 and 7 figures would have likely received offers illegally anyways. So it's not like it's changing the amount of money going into the sport. It's just making it a legal, taxable, above board, and hopefully going to help eliminate some of the competition issues between corrupt boosters and non-corrupt boosters. So we will go to Sean, Eugene, and then Karen. Sean, over.
Hey, Congresswoman, how are you? As the head of sports here at Clubhouse, I just want to thank you for this conversation, Justin, for leading it. It's unbelievably meaningful. And then secondly, as a former college athlete and a walk-on for the University of Pittsburgh, I saw so many of my former teammates go and have these sorts of conversations before the NIL was intact. So I think it's so important to advocate for this sort of thing and have these sorts of conversations and inform people about what's going on. So that's the first comment. The question rather is, and I may have missed this in terms of how do we think about the education portion around educating athletes, their family, their friends, people that may be helping manage them on taxes, logistics, business management, all those things, because now there's going to be so many opportunities legally poured at these kids and these young adults and these young men and women. How do we democratize that education, if you will, university to university, so there isn't, insane mistakes being made throughout?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We covered it sort of briefly earlier, but I don't think that we can talk about it enough. And frankly, one of the questions was, what does the future of the NCAA look like? This could be a role that they play, right? If they could ever take some of the revenue that that they get to reap off of these college athletes and put it back into educational programs so that, athletes can decipher and be ready. Look, that would be a great metamorphosis of that institution. Well, I think one of the things that has been flagged for me over and over, and I know it. I sympathize with it, is that the taxes. Taxes are going to be a very real thing that athletes are going to have to deal with when it comes to monetizing their name, image, and likeness. But like we said before, acting like that's a bad thing or a reason to rein in their right to be compensated for the use of their NIL is ridiculous. And so we have seen a number of stories of schools who, taking proactive action to keep their athletes informed of their NIL options. And in the cases of some schools, I mentioned UNC, but there are others, they help athletes organizing, interested in organizing group licensing deals. So I think if they take that same proactive approach to helping athletes navigate, NIL deals, what to expect, some of the flags or the pitfalls, any sort of tax filing, I do think that we're going to be able to mitigate most of the concerns that are being tossed around for NIL monetization. And I think it may change a little bit in terms of the role that universities play, when they are signing athletes or when they are orienting them to the program. But look, it has like positive externalities. I mean, and I think it could reap a lot of rewards for students in general to get sort of that financial footing, not just for their athletic careers, but also in life in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an evolution and a learning process for sure that obviously we're all learning, together, but it's a step in the right direction. So once again, thank you so much for this.
You bet.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. It's amazing how many former college athletes are on this stage and how strongly the Congresswoman in this topic has resonated with everybody. So we appreciate all these questions. We will go to Eugene and then Karen and then Ab. Eugene, over to you.
Hey, thanks for having this conversation. I'm a former college athlete. I played at Princeton. And even in my situation, I remember making a huge trade-off when it came to competing at the Division I level and the time that I had to allocate towards my academics. So I know people like to make the statement that you're getting a free college education, but when you're competing at the high level, you are not getting access to the same types of opportunities that my regular classmates had. And so that was something that I feel like is also understated. Another aspect that I would love to get your thoughts on is the salaries that my college coaches are paid. Right now, I'm looking at Nick Saban, $9 million a year. Ed Orgeron, $9 million. Dabo Sweeney, $9 million. David Shaw, $9 million. Go Card. But I really think that that's something that we need to really think clearly about, as well as the fact that these are all coaches that are coaching men's sports and how the women's coaches are being compensated as well. Because we need to make sure that inequalities that we're seeing in corporate life aren't being cascaded down into this collegiate level where that's the opportunity for us to raise the next generation of leaders. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how we're compensating college coaches and potential reform there, and also how we can address the inequalities that we're seeing across gender, even in the college ranks.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I mean, look, you were you pointed out the salaries of our coaches and even Alabama coach Nick Saban by name, and there's some of the proponents of the common criticisms that granting NIL rights is only going to benefit star players, right? And that dynamic is going to hurt college athletics. Is he gets to run away with the bank every year. So look, I think that the compensation of coaches has actually turned public opinion on this issue. I mean, no one now sort of believes that this is balanced, which has really helped the cause, right? I mean, I think it's helped at the state level. You've seen so many of these NIL policies enacted at the state level as a result of this. And so in terms of, the highest paid coaches pushing a narrative around this is going to hurt college sports and it's only going to benefit star players, I think it's pretty laughable, especially when it comes from high-paid coaches who said, NIL would be detrimental to camaraderie, but they don't think twice about doing an Aflac commercial while their fellow coaches, don't even have that same chance. So, look, you're absolutely right to flag the point. I mean, when we started this conversation, it was around making sure, and we have so many former college athletes on this conversation, so it's great because you get to sort of, share your lived experience, but that the context really matters. And I think people have lost sight of who the profile college athlete is these days, right? And so the more talking about it that you like, it comes with enormous pride. There's no question. You're not going to find a single college athlete who doesn't harken back to their college days, putting on that uniform, standing on the line, putting their hand on their heart as the national anthem plays. I mean, that was the ultimate. And for some of us, that was like the end of for most of us, that was the end of our, sports careers. But you cannot, that's not the only part of the story, right? I did not get to go to class as much as my peers. I did not get to meet the demands of my academic schedule the same way that someone who was going, and not having to, sort of live up to the scholarship or to that, that proposition had to do, right? So they had more time to study. They had more time for tutors. They had more time to go to office hours with their academic counselors or with their professors. They had more time to go abroad and, learn in another country. They had more time to sort of, just add to their academic experience with, internships or, relevant job experience. All of those things are things that college athletes give up. And I think people lose sight of that. So look, I think we're all going to play a role in this in terms of, moving the ball forward and making sure that we design a system that benefits the players first. And conversations like this one with a whole lot of former college athletes is going to really, be a catalyst for that. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Eugene. We're going to go to one last question, and then I'll shoot it over to the Congresswoman for her closing remarks. Karen, over to you to bring us home.
Yeah, hi. It's Black Karen, and I'm the proud daughter of an NCAA athlete, Bill Russell, and who also was part of the early lawsuits against the NCAA. And so an activist on and off the court. And with respect to coaching, I just want to just add that there's now a rule in the West Coast Conference called the Russell Rule that's very similar to the Rooney Rule in football. So my question for you is, and I just also really love your perspective and what you're doing, is sort of about the institutions beyond just use of the image. And that's about sort of talking about mental health, talking about health. We have coaches and players who may or may not be vaccinated. And so I think there's and also with respect to protesting, there's some pushback. And, the case that springs to mind is obviously Colin Kaepernick. So I was wondering if you could sort of speak a little bit to how do we make these institutions healthy for athletes not just through compensation, but through lifestyle.
It is such a treat for me to talk to Bill Russell's daughter. And I think it is for all of us. What a legend and what a pioneer in this space. So thank you for all of that. Look, I think that we talk about NIL. It stands to be a boon, especially for athletes who come from low income, backgrounds. It focuses on delivering benefits to a diverse set of athletes. But I think what you raise goes well beyond that. And the right to organize, the college athlete right to organize, really puts the tools in the hands of athletes. So that they can have the upper hand on institutions finally, so that they can have a voice at the table. And that's for whether we're talking about, protests, that's, vaccines, safety of play, all of those things where, it's you talk about Colin Kaepernick, he wore it on his shoulders alone, right? And athletes need to have that ability to join together and have their voice heard together, which is why unionizing and collective bargaining is such an important part of changing that power imbalance that we've all lived with for decades. So I think that's what we want through this bill. We want to make sure they can negotiate fairer practice schedules, a healthier practice. You brought up mental health, of course, like all of these issues that, we're only touching the surface right now, but there's so many that are percolating to the top, and athletes know best themselves. And if we give them the ability to organize, whether it's more study time to focus on school or mental health services, all of that, I think we want that to be put in the hands of players so that we do see the equity and we do see, the power shift back to them, which is exactly where it should be in the first place. So thank you.
Congresswoman, I know you have to jump. I want to thank you very much. And on behalf of the 3,000 people here, you are a fantastic guest. We will have to have you back on in the spring and summer. But I wanted to just kick it to you for last remarks, if you wanted to leave the audience with anything. And then I'm sure you have a very busy day of work ahead of you.
Well, look, thank you. As you can imagine, this year has been mostly focused on passing the American Rescue Plan, passing bipartisan infrastructure, working on the Build Back Better. And all of those are so important, especially as, we're dealing with Omicron right now and surges all across our country. But, carving out the space for conversations like this one is really important. I work on a myriad of issues, everything from reining in big tech to making sure that where we're giving college athletes, the power and the rights that they deserve. Those are also important conversations. And sometimes they don't get elevated in our national media, but it doesn't mean that they don't rise to the level of importance. And, Congress, in my mind, was designed so that we could do many things at once and have many conversations at once and bring different forms of legislation to get at these problems. And so I just want to thank you all for your commitment to, moving this forward, to changing public opinion, to changing your stories, because what I'm really hopeful for as I look at 2022 is using the urgency around what we saw with the Supreme Court and state laws, across the country to really drive this to conclusion. And so that doesn't happen, with one member of Congress or a handful. It really does happen when more people understand that it is the right approach and the optimistic path forward. So thank you all. Please stay engaged. And I look forward to next time.
Looks like that is all we have for you today. Again, huge thanks to Congresswoman Trahan for coming out, to our audience for their questions, and to you for being here. As always, if you like or dislike what you hear, if you want to find out how to join us live almost every day of the week, maybe ask one of our upcoming guests a question, or hear past episodes, please visit our website, pm101.club or pm101.live. They both work and will get you to the same place where you can find all that and more. This has been Politics and Media 101, produced in partnership with Clubhouse. I'm Jeff Browning on behalf of Justin Higgins, our co-founder, and our team. Thank you very much for being here. We hope to see you and hear from you soon.